listening to the Life Edit Project podcast, where busy, ambitious high achievers get the tools they need to fight overwhelm and overthinking with balance, self-mastery, and a positive mindset. I'm your host, Elizabeth Burrows. I'm serving up bite-sized truth bombs in a judgment-free zone based on my perspective as a life coach, wife, mom, and recovering overachiever. We keep it real over here, which usually means some combination of insightful, entertaining, and a hot mess express. So, if you're looking for perfection, look elsewhere. But if you're still with me, let's dig into this week's episode. Good day, good people. Welcome back to the Life Edit Project podcast. This is episode 9, and I am so glad that you're here rocking with me yet again. I've got a juicy conversation lined up for us today. We're going to talk about negative self-talk because it's a real problem for so many of us high achievers. But so often it's also an invisible problem, which makes it really hard to fight. So I want to use this episode to make it both easier to spot and easier to counteract. But first, I want to show a little love to a special listener that sent me some private feedback about this show. She's not officially one of my listener bays, but I was so touched by her words that I wanted to share what she said with you all today. Because it was a private message, I won't share her name. We'll just call her Miss C. And here's what she said, or here's part of what she said, because she sent me a whole message about some other stuff. I just listened to a couple of your podcast episodes, and I want to commend you on starting, being motivational, and also your transparency. I love how digestible and easygoing your episodes have been to listen to so far, and I have been encouraged officially. Miss C, if you're listening this week, thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it so much, and I appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with me. Y'all, messages like this are really encouraging to me because podcasting is like a one-way conversation. I'm over here speaking into the void, and I have no idea what y'all are thinking or feeling on the other side unless you drop a note like this or leave me a review. Speaking of which, if you've enjoyed any of my podcast episodes, if you've ever heard anything on this show at any time that has helped you do something or feel better, please consider supporting me by leaving a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. If you don't know how to do that, you can get instructions step by step on my website. Just go to lifeeditproject.com/podcast. To get those details. And of course, as always, that link is going to be in the show notes just for you. Now, let's talk about self-talk, shall we? First, let's make sure we're all on the same page and mean the same thing. I'm going to give you the Coach Elizabeth definition of self-talk, which you will find in absolutely nobody's dictionary because it's mine. Okay, self-talk is the narrative inside your head that's about you or directed toward you, whether it be expressed internally or externally, and done consciously or unconsciously. I'll say it again. Self-talk is the narrative inside your head that's about you or directed toward you, whether it be expressed internally or externally, and whether it's done consciously or unconsciously. Or maybe the word I'm looking for is subconsciously. That's probably it. Okay. So what I really want to emphasize here is that self-talk is a really normal thing that happens inside the minds of regular humans. Because humans are self-aware creatures and communicators by nature. So self-talk is pretty unavoidable. And that's okay. What you should know, however, is that not all self-talk is the same. It can be positive, it can be neutral, or it can be negative. And what's the difference? Positive self-talk is affirming, and it may have that feel of a pep talk. Neutral self-talk is objective or descriptive. And negative self-talk is discouraging and disempowering. Let me give you some examples. So let's say it's an average day and you're working your way through a long to-do list. Positive self-talk might sound like, man, I've been so productive today. I've already crossed so many things off my list. Neutral self-talk in this same situation might sound like, I'm a third of the way through this to-do list and my energy is starting to fade. And then negative self-talk might sound something like, I'm so lazy. I always wait until the last minute to do things, and now I'll never get through all of these tasks. Now, this is a pretty generic scenario, working your way through a to-do list, and so it's probably one that you can identify with. And perhaps one of these examples of self-talk that I just gave you sounds more familiar to you than the others. Or maybe all three of them sound similar to you and similar to the way your brain talks to you throughout the day. Either way, regardless of the emotional charge that your self-talk carries, whether it's positive, neutral, or negative, self-talk is incredibly important. Because no matter how instinctive or careless or unserious you are with your self-talk, a part of you is always listening. And for that reason, negative self-talk is highly problematic. Because there's always a part of you that's soaking in that negative energy. Negative self-talk is never harmless. Now, tragically, I've noticed that even though negative self-talk is so harmful, it is highly normalized among girls and women of all ages. Now, that's not to say that our men folk and our non-binary folk and our gender non-conforming folk don't experience negative self-talk, because they absolutely do. I'm just talking about what I've noticed among girls and women. So, in addition to hearing about negative self-talk, sometimes you'll hear it referred to as your inner critic or maybe your inner mean girl, right? Either way, it's alarmingly common for girls and women to talk badly to themselves and about themselves in everyday conversation. And if you take 2 seconds to think about it, I'm sure you will recall a situation where you, your homegirl, your daughter, your auntie, your mama, your friend, whatever, talked badly to or about yourself. It is not hard. And that's just the self-talk that gets expressed externally, right? The self-talk that we actually can witness other people engaging in. There's so much more negative self-talk that happens internally, which is why I'm calling negative self-talk an invisible problem. Okay, fun fact. When I first planned season 1 of this show, episode 9 was not going to be about self-talk. I had a whole different topic planned. But as the season carried on, I started noticing negative self-talk in a bunch of different places and cropping up in a bunch of different conversations. And so I decided to bring this talk to the podcast because it's just so needed. In fact, I had 2 recent interactions where it really lit a fire under me, and I just had to talk to all y'all here on this podcast. So the first one involved my 9-year-old daughter. Yes, my 9-year-old daughter, my baby girl. So I was at home with my husband and my daughter, and we were having just like a regular, normal, everyday conversation about something so completely mundane, I don't even remember what it was. And at some point, my husband turns to our daughter and he asks her if she had done something that they'd talked about before. And instead of just saying no or not yet or I forgot, my daughter answered, no, of course not, because I'm stupid and irresponsible and I never do anything right. And she just launched into this whole spew, this whole litany of bad things about herself. And I was aghast, mouth open. I was floored, bewildered. And I was thinking to myself, what on earth is happening right now? Like, why is she thinking about herself this way? And why is she saying this out loud? And so I interrupted whatever the conversation that my husband was having with her to tell her that she is never to talk about herself that way. I told her that she was being unkind to herself, that what she was saying was not even the truth, and I would not stand for it because nobody gets to talk about my daughter that way. Because I'm that kind of mom, I even quoted some scripture and reminded her that she is beautifully and fearfully and wonderfully made. And that is what God says about her. And how dare she say anything different, because it's serious, right? And she's 9 and this rolled off of her tongue so effortlessly. I could absolutely tell this is not the first time that she has had these thoughts. This was just one of my first times witnessing it happen so clearly. Then, on the heels of that conversation, just a few days later, I was with a group of friends, which included an older woman that happens to be like in her mid to late 60s. And she was telling us this funny story about something that had happened to her, or happened in her life. And we were all laughing and kikiing, and it was, funny. Then all of a sudden, she wraps up this story by sprinkling in this overgeneralization and this insult about herself, saying something to the effect of, oh, I always, act stupid, and I always make these kinds of mistakes. And I found it to be so bizarre because it completely changed the tone of the story that she just shared. It went from, this is funny, laugh with me, to, I'm ashamed of being this kind of person. And again, I was like, what is happening? Because this woman, she's just one of the most beautiful souls that I know. She's kind and she's loving and generous and intelligent and accomplished and full of integrity. Like, homegirl has got it going on. And so I could not understand why she was speaking about herself this way. And so, of course, I interjected and I pointed out that she was being unkind to herself. And I invited her to be more intentional with what she says to herself about herself. And she was gracious enough to, accept what I was saying and even thank me for the feedback, right? But it was being there, witnessing these two very different examples of negative self-talk, right, that really got under my skin. Because if the babies and the elders are experiencing this, it's a sign that this issue touches all of us. Everyone with a brain, including me and including you, will experience self-talk. Yeah, that's normal. But while we can't eliminate it completely, we can absolutely mitigate the impact that it has on us by learning how to recognize it and respond to it. So I am going to give you some practical steps on how to overcome negative self-talk. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge that it's a process. It's not something you do once and then get lifetime results. It's going to be an ongoing practice because negative self-talk is very sticky. And here's why it's so sticky. 1, it's often done unconsciously. So we dish it out to ourselves, our self-talk, without making a conscious decision to do so. And it can become like background noise so that we end up getting very good at tuning it out until we no longer realize that the self-talk is even there, right? So we're not conscious that we're doing it. We're also not conscious that we're hearing it. And so it takes a more than conscious effort to change the self-talk. Self-talk is also sticky, negative self-talk in particular, because it's habitual. So our brains are always trying to be as efficient as possible. And one of the ways our brains save brain power is by creating habits. And I want you to think of habits like mental shortcuts, where instead of thinking, our brain notices a trigger and then responds in a predetermined way. Right? And changing habitual thoughts is going to require disruption and a concentrated effort. Without the disruption and without that concentrated effort, the habit of negative self-talk is going to stick. 3, negative self-talk is also sticky because we tend to believe it. Hear me on this. So often we buy into the story that our brains are offering us through negative self-talk. And we get so invested in believing the story that we stop questioning it and we simply accept it as fact. And not just as the fact of our current reality, we tend to accept these stories as unchangeable, inescapable predictions for the future. We are all the way bought into the story that negative self-talk is telling us. And a fourth reason why negative self-talk can be so sticky is because we think we need it. And this is especially true for us high achievers. At some point, you learned that there's room for improvement, that you can do better, and that you should do better. And at some point, you got some type of criticism and you didn't like it. You didn't like how it felt. And so to avoid that type of criticism and that feeling in the future, you changed or improved. You fixed whatever they said was wrong. And then you started believing that criticism is the catalyst for your improvement. And eventually, you started criticizing yourself as a way to inspire yourself to keep getting better. But somewhere along the way, the criticism got corrupted and it became a stream of just negative self-talk. Just a bag of insults that you hurl at yourself, really. But now you believe that your inner critic is part of what makes you great, that it's one of your keys to success, that it's what keeps you from being just another slacker. And so you don't just accept the negative self-talk, you actually create it because you believe you can't be great without it. And if all of these things are true, of course, it makes sense that it's going to take more than just a simple pep talk to neutralize a lifetime of negative self-talk. Hey there. Do you have a burning question that you want a professional life coach to answer for free? Good news. Episode 10 of this show is all about you getting the answers you need. Check the show notes for a link to the submission form where you can ask me anything and ask as many questions as you like. I can't guarantee that every question will make it onto the show, but I will guarantee that you can remain anonymous if you like, so that your business doesn't have to be on Front Street. Get your questions in by Sunday, July 23rd to be considered, and tune into episode 10 for my response. I can't wait to hear from you. Okay, back to the show. So, we know what self-talk is, and we've established that it's sticky, tricky, icky stuff. Overcoming it and neutralizing it is a process, but there are just 4 simple steps in this process that you can follow to lower the volume on your negative self-talk so that you can overcome it. First, I want you to tune into it. Awareness is always the first step because you can't do anything to fix a problem that you can't identify. So you have to practice noticing what you say to and about yourself. Now, some of the hallmarks of negative self-talk that I want you to look out for are name calling. So when you hear the words stupid, lazy, worthless, ugly, or whatever other names you call yourself, that's a sign that, this is negative self-talk. Also, judging. And judging often sounds like should or should not, right? I should not have eaten that. I should wake up earlier, right? That's also a sign that you're engaging in negative self-talk. Generalizing statements. Whenever you hear yourself talk to yourself and describe your behavior as always or never, so I'm always overeating, I'm never nice enough or patient enough with my kids, right? That is probably a signal that you might be engaging in negative self-talk. And then finally, deflating comments. And a deflating comment is going to be anything that makes you feel less capable of showing up the way you want to show up. And it's not so much a word that you look out for, it's more of the feeling that comes with it, right? So If you say something to yourself and you notice that you kind of lose a little bit of the wind in your sails and your shoulders kind of shrink, maybe you draw in a little bit on yourself, that might be a sign that you're engaging in negative self-talk. So look for the hallmarks of negative self-talk so that you can identify it. The second step in this process is to label it. Now, I don't just want you to label your negative self-talk as negative, right? That's the point. We know it's negative. I want you to label it as head trash. And if that phrase, head trash, doesn't mean anything to you, please go back and listen to episode 8, where I talked about head trash and I introduced the concept of the thought factory. But suffice it to say, your brain churns out thousands upon thousands of thoughts each day, and they're not all great. They're not all worth keeping. Some of them are garbage, just pure waste byproducts that are created in the process of generating other quality thoughts. Some thoughts that come out of your thought factory are defective. Some are broken. Negative self-talk is head trash. Any way you slice it, it's garbage. Third, I want you to practice discarding it, right? So once you've identified and you've labeled your negative self-talk as head trash, what do we do with trash? We dispose of it. You don't have to argue with it. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to react to it. You don't even need to try to disprove it. You can literally just acknowledge it as head trash and not feel an ounce of guilt about immediately discarding it. Because you're not supposed to feel bad about taking out the trash. It's just a chore that you do, right? And if you want more details about how to dispose of the head trash, again, I'm going to refer you back to episode 8 where I talked about taking out the head trash. I gave you a whole process and a whole list of options for disposing of head trash. Okay, the fourth step in the process of overcoming negative self-talk is to replace it. So even though you're going to practice releasing the negative self-talk when you recognize it, you still have to neutralize the negativity, right? Remember, negative self-talk is never harmless because there's always a part of you that's listening. And even when you go through the steps of tuning in, labeling, and discarding negative self-talk, it can still do some damage to your self-confidence and self-esteem during that process. So we counteract the negativity by cultivating self-talk that is more positive. And I want you to reach for the most positive thought that your brain does not immediately reject. Sometimes that means you're replacing negative self-talk with neutral self-talk, because the positive can feel really foreign and unfamiliar if you've been engaging in intensely negative self-talk for an extended period. For example, let's say you've been telling yourself that you have an ugly smile since you were a teenager, and that one guy told you that your teeth were crooked and ugly. If you're in your 30s now, you've had this negative self-talk about your smile on repeat for 20 years. Your brain will just laugh at you and reject you if you suddenly try to tell it, I have the most beautiful smile in the world. So don't do that. Instead, when you catch yourself thinking, my smile is so ugly, you can practice something more neutral like, I have a natural smile. Or maybe something like, my smile is a sign that I'm happy or amused. Either way, sometimes the antidote to negative self-talk is neutral self-talk, and that's perfectly fine. So all in all, if you practice following these 4 steps to overcoming negative self-talk, it may not be easy in the beginning, but it will get easier. Each step of the process will get easier over time. The more you tune in and learn to listen for your negative self-talk, the easier it will be for you to notice it. And remember, the goal is not to completely eliminate negative self-talk. The goal is to simply turn the volume down on the negative self-talk that you do experience and to take some of the sting out of it. We want to neutralize as much of your negative self-talk as quickly as possible, and we want to practice getting rid of the head trash that is negative self-talk sooner rather than later. If you don't think that you can follow this process on your own, or if you're interested in being assisted through the process of overcoming negative self-talk so that you can create more positive results in your life, book a free sales call with me for one-on-one coaching. Because you do know that I'm a life coach and I does this. I help my clients get better at identifying their negative self-talk and neutralizing it, and eventually replacing it with more neutral and positive self-talk over time. Listen, when you finally learn how to turn the volume down on your negative self-talk and discard the head trash when it shows up, what you are capable of doing is more and bigger and deeper than anything you can imagine. I would love to work with you. If you want to book a call with me, tap the link that is in the show notes. It's always there for you because I can't wait to work with you. That's all for now. That's episode 9 of the Life Edit Project podcast in the books. I do hope you'll tune in next week for our very special listener Q&A episode. All right, y'all. Peace. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Life Edit Project podcast. I'd love to hear what your favorite moment or key takeaway was from this conversation. You can send me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter to let me know. My handle is @LifeEditProject, all one word, in all the places. My social media is linked up in the show notes to make it easy for you. Holla at your girl. I'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, don't just stay busy with the life you have, get busy creating the life you want.